There are at least a couple of ways to read the Gospels. We can read them as a collection of individual but relatively unrelated scenes, or we can read them as carefully constructed narratives, where every scene is placed where it is for a purpose. I think the Gospel writers were all skillful enough editors and writers that they were doing more than simply reporting. After all, they composed their written accounts literally decades after the death and resurrection of Jesus. You wouldn't expect them to get every detail exactly as it happened, as if they'd been carrying a notepad or video camera recording everything as it actually took place. I say all this because the last story Matthew records before Jesus enters Jerusalem on Palm Sunday is a healing miracle, and not just any healing, but a very specific one. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Saturday, April 1st, 2023. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record versions of this story. It's a story of the restoration of sight to the blind. Mark even names the blind man, Bartimaeus. Luke doesn't name him, but he does tell the story. For Matthew and Mark, it is the last thing Jesus does before entering Jerusalem. Luke tells one more story and one more parable after the healing, but not too much of a difference. But what is really interesting is that Matthew makes it two blind men, not one. You could chalk this up to different people remembering the event differently. That does happen all the time, especially after many years have passed. But I think Matthew has another purpose here, one that is connected to yesterday's story. Remember, in yesterday's episode, that the mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee, asked Jesus for the privilege of having her two sons sit at the places of honor at the right and left hand of Jesus in his kingdom. It is clear that both she and her two sons are blind to what Jesus is all about. They clearly haven't heard what he taught, and they clearly don't see that to claim such privilege for themselves is antithetical to everything that Jesus is all about. So now, Jesus encounters two blind men who beg for mercy. Here's how Matthew tells the story. As they were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. There were two blind men sitting by the roadside. When they heard that Jesus was passing by, they shouted, "Lord, have mercy on us, Son of David." The crowd sternly ordered them to be quiet. But they shouted even more loudly, "Have mercy on us, Lord, Son of David." Jesus stood still and called them, saying, "What do you want me to do for you?" They answered him, "Lord, let our eyes be opened." Moved with compassion, Jesus touched their eyes. Immediately they regained their sight and followed him. The contrast between James and John on the one hand and these two blind men on the other seems clear enough. James and John have seen Jesus throughout his ministry in Galilee. They've witnessed many, if not all, of his miracles. They've heard him preach and teach. And yet, after all that, they remain blind to what it's all about. All they can think about is their own glory. The blind men, on the other hand, have likely only heard about Jesus from afar. All they know is that he is a healer who, they believe, has the power to restore sight to their eyes. They know their need, and so they plead, they beg for mercy. For though they are physically blind, they see clearly who Jesus is. And not just a great healer either, but Lord and Son of David. Why do the blind men see so clearly while the disciples seem so blind? Perhaps it's because of a sort of familiarity phenomenon. When we're around something for long enough, we tend to treat that thing as a given and forget why that thing is special in the first place. To put it in more concrete terms, I've begun to discover that people who've been Christians for a very long time have a harder time articulating what about their faith is so important to them than people who are newer to the faith. These are people who can often speak very clearly and forcefully about why the faith is important to them. The more familiar we are with our faith, the more it becomes a part of who we are, the more blind we are to the reasons why it is important to us. My guess, and this is only a guess of course, is that the disciples were blind because they were too close, an all too human phenomenon. So, instead of condemning the disciples, perhaps we should use their example and the example of the blind men to regain our sight, to remember why it is the faith is important to us. When we return next week, we'll follow Jesus around Jerusalem during his last week. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.